Religious revolutionaries. I don't think you would have liked the Georgians. They could be cruel, greedy and selfish, and they stank. The rich did all they could not to pay taxes. They did not want to spend money on a police force or expensive prisons. If a criminal was caught, they would either be hanged or deported to work as a kind of slave in America or Australia. It was cheaper that way. The rich also made pots of money from the slave trade and from the things made by slaves in the British colonies in America and the Caribbean. They did not want to waste money on things like schools, hospitals, looking after orphans, or feeding the poor. What really mattered to the Georgians was living it up in fine houses with lots of servants and eating huge meals of fancy food. Georgians loved cruel entertainments like cockfighting, bear baiting, or a good public hanging. The poor and weak were exploited, working long hours and being paid as little as possible. Even young children were put to work. This modern pulpit on the edge of Bristol marks the spot where all of this started to change. In 1739, a Church of England clergyman called George Whitfield started doing something here that was shocking and new. The poor people who worked in the coal mines never went to church, so he decided that church should go to them. He stood on this spot and started to preach in the open air. Every time he did this, more and more people came to hear him, until there were thousands standing to listen on this Bristol hillside. As George talked about Jesus' love and forgiveness, the tears rolled down the coal miners' dirty faces as they believed the message and decided to live as Christians. What George Whitfield was doing got him into all kinds of trouble, especially with some of his fellow clergy. But people loved to hear George, from the poorest to the richest in the land. Even the king joked that perhaps he should make George a bishop. Across the Atlantic Ocean, there was a little British colony called America. You may have heard of it. George had been a big hit there too, and he wanted to go back. But who would carry on his work in Bristol? John Wesley was shocked when his friend George invited him to Bristol to preach on that hillside to the thousands that came. Respectable vicars didn't do things like that. Soon, the big crowds were coming to hear John Wesley too, and he started to travel the UK, preaching everywhere he went. George went to America to do the same thing there. On both sides of the Atlantic, many people started going to church and taking their Christian faith seriously. Jesus taught about agape, which is sacrificial love and compassion for all others. Gradually, these Christians started to put these teachings of Jesus into practice, and things in society started to change. A Christian MP called William Wilberforce and a vicar called John Newton worked to get slavery abolished throughout the British Empire. After that, Royal Navy warships would stop every slave ship they found and set the slaves on board free. Lord Shaftesbury was an important member of Parliament who worked to pass laws that stopped children being forced to work in factories and mines, and made employers treat their workers more fairly. Elizabeth Fry and John Howard improved the treatment of prisoners. Christians started educating the poor and opening church schools. They also worked to provide those in need with food, healthcare, and orphanages. As you look around the world today, these good things begun by those Georgian Christians have continued to make many people's lives better. They work to help others and to make society less selfish, fairer, and more caring, not just in Britain, but around the world. It all started here, in a field that is now a housing estate on the edge of Bristol.